I knew something was wrong as soon as the station came into view. It wasn't just the silence, that total absence of communication coming from it, as if it were a carcass floating in the vacuum of space. It was something deeper, something that seemed to whisper to me through the shadows of the cabin while I stared at the monitors with tired eyes and trembling hands. My name is Commander Roger Sullivan, but my colleagues aboard the Horizon just call me Commander. I'm a 45-year-old man, a veteran of 3 long missions in deep space, and yet still unable to escape the weight of loneliness that comes with the vast blackness out there. My son Daniel is 16 and lives on Earth with my ex-wife. I was never good at being a father. I always chose work over family life, but now, in this moment, I'm flooded with flashes of memories of him as a child, laughing beside me as I tried to teach him how to build a paper rocket. Those memories are like thorns embedded in my mind, surfacing without warning and bringing with them a guilt that never fully fades. The order came directly from Central Command: investigate Kappa 7 Station. It had been built 5 years ago as an advanced scientific research laboratory, designed to study rare cosmic phenomena and test revolutionary technologies. But then, just over a month ago, all transmissions ceased abruptly. No warnings, no distress calls, just silence. Our team was sent to find out what happened. There were 6 of us aboard the Horizon: me, Chief Engineer Marcus Alvarez, biologist Dr. Elena Torres, theoretical physicist Dr. Victor Kim, life support systems specialist Anya Petrova, and pilot Rafael Santos. Each of us had essential skills. Each of us trusted the others blindly, or at least pretended to. Now I realized that trust was as fragile as a spider's web about to snap. The station slowly spun before our eyes, its metallic structure gleaming under the distant light of a dying star. It looked like a mechanical corpse, its antennas broken and solar panels covered by a thin layer of space dust that shimmered like exposed bones. There was something wrong about that place, something that couldn't be explained rationally. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept my composure. It was my duty to keep everyone calm, even as I felt terror growing inside me. "It's fine," I muttered to myself, though my words sounded hollow even to me. "It's just another mission." But it wasn't. The docking process was complicated, as if the station itself resisted our presence. The automated systems failed repeatedly, forcing us to make a manual connection. While Marcus and Raphael struggled with the controls in the operations room, I watched the main monitor, where external cameras showed the corroded surface of Kappa 7. There were strange marks on the outer walls, patterns that seemed deliberately etched there. They were irregular, almost organic, like scars left by something alive. I frowned, trying to push away the absurd idea that this place was breathing. Finally, we docked. Raphael let out a relieved sigh, wiping the sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "Done," he said with a tense smile. "Let's find out what the hell happened here." We gathered in the main corridor before opening the hatch. Each of us wore full exploration suits, equipped with oxygen, flashlights, and collection instruments. I looked at my companions, trying to read their faces behind their helmets. Anya seemed nervous, her fingers tapping on the holster of her static weapon. Victor, as always, was lost in thought, muttering numbers under his breath as he adjusted his scanner. Elena, on the other hand, looked determined, her eyes fixed on the closed door, as if she could already see the mystery waiting for us. "Basic rules," I said, my voice echoing through the communicators. "Stay together. Don't touch anything until we're sure it's safe. If something feels wrong, report it immediately." No one responded, but everyone nodded. I opened the hatch, and we were greeted by an acrid smell like burnt metal mixed with something chemical and nauseating. The air inside the station was still intact, but something about it felt wrong, as if we were breathing contaminated atmosphere, even though our filters were working perfectly. The first thing we noticed was the silence. Absolute, oppressive silence that filled every inch of the environment. There was no hum of machinery, no constant buzz of life support systems. Only the sound of our boots echoing on the metallic floor as we moved down the main corridor. The lights flickered intermittently, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. Those marks we'd seen outside continued inside, larger and more complex, forming patterns that seemed to shift the longer you stared at them. "This doesn't make sense," Victor murmured, touching one of the marks with the tip of his scanner. "These symbols? They don't match any known human writing system." "So, who put them here?" asked Anya, her voice tense. No one answered. We pressed on, passing sealed doors and abandoned rooms. Some were open, revealing overturned furniture, papers scattered across the floor, and destroyed equipment. It looked as if someone, or something, had ransacked the place. Or maybe panicked. There were no bodies, no obvious signs of violence. Just this inexplicable chaos, as if reality itself had begun to unravel there. That's when we found the first hint of the horror that awaited us, a research room on the lower level. The doors were locked, but Marcus managed to hack the security system. When we entered, we froze. The room was filled with enormous glass tubes, each containing grotesque forms floating in murky liquids. They were creatures that seemed part animal, part machine, part something we couldn't comprehend. Some had human arms attached to segmented bodies. Others possessed elongated heads with multiple eyes that seemed to follow our movements even though they were inert. Elena stepped back, covering her mouth with her hand. "What is this? What the hell were they doing here?" "We need to document everything," said Victor, his voice trembling slightly. He began photographing the tubes, but I stopped him. "No, we're leaving now." My voice was firm, but my whole body vibrated with fear. I knew instinctively that this wasn't natural, that we were meddling with something that should never have been touched. Before we could leave, we heard a sound coming from the back of the room, a low gurgle, followed by a metallic click. We all turned at the same time, our flashlights illuminating the farthest corner. There, on the floor, lay an open notebook, its pages covered in frantic notes written in different languages and unknown alphabets. In the center of the page, a sentence written in English stood out in bold letters. "They are calling." Raphael bent down to pick up the notebook, but I stopped him. "Don't touch it," I shouted, my voice echoing off the walls. He looked at me, confused. "Why?" "Because I felt it. I felt that presence watching us, hovering just beyond the edge of what we could see. It was like being submerged in deep water, knowing something huge and invisible was right below you, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Just, let's go," I said, trying to stay calm. "We need to get back to the ship and report this." But as we walked back toward the hatch, I started hearing voices. They weren't coming from my companions but from inside my head. Unintelligible whispers, fragments of words in languages I'd never learned. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to block them out, but they grew louder, more insistent. When I opened my eyes again, I realized the marks on the walls had changed. They were closer, more alive. And then, for the first time, I knew we weren't alone. The corridors of Kappa 7 seemed to stretch endlessly before us, as if the station itself was expanding, growing larger with every step we took. My heart pounded. In my chest, a relentless drumbeat that echoed the growing unease in my mind. The whispers were louder now, a cacophony of alien tongues and fragmented syllables that clawed at the edges of my sanity. I tried to focus on the mission, on keeping my team together, but it was becoming harder with each passing moment. "Commander," Anya's voice crackled through the comms, her tone sharp with anxiety. "We need to leave. Now." I wanted to agree, to turn back and abandon this cursed place, but something held me in place. It wasn't just duty or curiosity. It was something deeper, an insidious pull that seemed to emanate from the very walls around us. The marks etched into the metal had begun to shift subtly, their patterns twisting into shapes that defied geometry. They seemed alive, pulsing faintly under the flickering lights, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching us. "We can't leave yet," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Not until we know what happened here." Victor, ever the scientist, was already scanning one of the walls, his face illuminated by the glow of his device. "These symbols, they're not random. They're part of a system, a language. But it's unlike anything I've ever seen. It's as if—" He paused, his eyes widening behind his visor. "It's as if they're trying to communicate." "Communicate?" Elena snapped, her voice trembling. With who? Us? Or whatever made those things in the lab? No one answered. We all knew the truth, even if we refused to say it aloud. Something had been experimenting here, something far beyond human comprehension. And whatever it wasn't done. We pressed on, moving deeper into the bowels of the station. The air grew colder, almost unbearably so, despite our suits' thermal systems working overtime. Frost began to form on the walls, crystalline patterns spreading like veins across the metal. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of our footsteps and the occasional low hum that seemed to resonate from nowhere and everywhere at once. Then we found the first body. It was slumped against a bulkhead. Its posture, unnatural, limbs twisted at impossible angles. At first glance, it looked human. Or at least, it had once been human. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and stretched taut over bones that seemed too large, too sharp. Its eyes were gone, replaced by dark, empty sockets that stared into nothingness. But the worst part was its mouth, frozen in a silent scream. Lips peeled back to reveal rows of jagged teeth that no human should possess. "Oh God," Marcus whispered, taking a step back. "What the hell is that?" "It's one of them," Victor murmured, his voice barely audible. "One of the scientists, or what's left of them." I knelt beside the corpse, forcing myself to examine it more closely. There were marks on its neck, puncture wounds, deep and blackened, as if something had drained it dry. But there was no blood, no sign of trauma beyond the grotesque transformation. Whatever had happened here, it hadn't been quick or painless. "We need to keep moving," I said, standing up. My voice was firm, though my hands shook inside my gloves. "If there are more survivors—" "There won't be any survivors," Anya interrupted, her tone flat but laced with dread. "Not after this." She was right, and we all knew it. This place wasn't just abandoned, it was dead. Every room we entered told the same story: chaos, destruction, and an overwhelming sense of wrongness. Yet we couldn't stop. Something was driving us forward, pulling us deeper into the labyrinth of horrors that Kappa 7 had become. Eventually, we reached a massive chamber at the heart of the station. The doors slid open with a groan, revealing a space that defied logic. The walls curved inward, forming a dome that seemed impossibly vast given the station's size. In the center of the room stood a monolith, a towering structure made of some kind of obsidian-like material that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Strange symbols covered its surface, glowing faintly with an otherworldly energy. "What is this?" Raphael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a gateway," Victor replied, his eyes wide with awe and terror. "Or maybe a prison. Look at the patterns. They're fractal, recursive. It's like they're designed to contain something. Something moved in the shadows. We all saw it, though none of us dared to speak. A shape, indistinct and shifting, hovered near the edges of the chamber. It didn't have a clear form, instead flowing like liquid smoke, tendrils reaching out and retracting as if testing the air. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment, I thought I heard laughter, low, guttural, and utterly alien. "Back away," I ordered, raising my weapon instinctively. Slowly, but it was too late. The thing surged forward faster than anything I'd ever seen, enveloping us in darkness. I felt it brush against my mind, probing, searching. Memories flooded back unbidden. Daniel's laughter, my wife's tear-streaked face during our final argument, the countless nights I'd spent staring into the void, wondering if anyone was out there. And then came the voices, louder now, deafening, screaming in languages I couldn't understand but somehow knew. They weren't just sounds, they were thoughts, emotions, fragments of something ancient and incomprehensible. I fell to my knees, clutching my helmet as if it could shield me from the storm raging inside my head. "Roger!" Elena shouted, grabbing my arm. Her voice brought me back, if only for a moment. I blinked, tears streaming down my face, and saw the others similarly overwhelmed. Only Victor remained standing, transfixed by the monolith. "They're calling us," he said, his voice hollow. "They want us to join them." "No!" I yelled, pushing past him. "We're leaving. Now." But as I turned to go, the monolith pulsed with light, and the entire chamber trembled. The shadowy entity recoiled, retreating into the corners of the room. But the damage was done. The symbols on the walls flared, brighter, and the whispers became a single unified chant, "They are here." The chant reverberated through the chamber, a guttural symphony of voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't just sound, it was pressure, an oppressive weight that pressed against my chest and made it hard to breathe. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I saw shapes moving in the glowing symbols on the walls. Faces, twisted and elongated, their mouths open in silent screams. They weren't human. Whatever they were, they belonged to something ancient, something that existed long before humanity crawled out of the primordial muck. "Commander!" Anya's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and desperate. She was pointing at Victor, who stood, frozen in front of the monolith, his scanner forgotten in his hand. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and glazed over as if he were staring into infinity itself. "Victor!" I shouted, grabbing him by the shoulders and shaking him. "Snap out of it!" Didn't respond. Instead, he began to mutter under his breath, words spilling out in a language none of us recognized. The syllables were harsh, guttural, and wrong, like nails scraping against metal. His hands trembled violently, and then he started laughing, a low, manic chuckle that grew louder and more unhinged with each passing second. "Victor, stop!" Elena pleaded, her voice cracking. She reached out to pull him away, but Marcus held her back. "Don't touch him," he warned, his face pale. "Whatever's happening to him, it's not safe." I tried to drag Victor away from the monolith, but his body felt unnaturally heavy, as if gravity itself had intensified around him. And then, without warning, he collapsed to the ground, convulsing violently. Foam bubbled at the corners of his mouth, and his laughter turned into a strangled gurgle. His eyes rolled back into his head, leaving only the whites visible. "Get him out of here," I ordered, but it was already too late. The monolith pulsed again, brighter this time, bathing the room in an eerie, violet light. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, and the temperature plummeted. Frost spread across the floor, creeping toward us like tendrils of ice. In the center of the chamber, the shadowy entity reappeared, coalescing into a vaguely humanoid shape. Its form shifted constantly, limbs stretching and contorting in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Its face, if you could call it that, was a mass of writhing tentacles, each one ending in a single, lidless eye that glared at us with malevolent intelligence. "What is that thing?" Raphael whispered, raising his weapon shakily. "It's what they were trying to contain," Marcus replied, his voice barely audible. "And now it's free." The entity let out a sound that defied description, a screech so loud it felt like my skull was splitting open. My ears rang, and dark spots danced across my vision. I stumbled backward, clutching my helmet, trying to block out the noise. But it wasn't just external. It was inside my head, burrowing deeper with every passing second. Memories flashed. Before my eyes, Daniel's first steps, my ex-wife slamming the door after our final fight, the endless nights spent staring into the void of space. Each memory was distorted, twisted into something grotesque and alien. And then came the images. Horrible, incomprehensible visions of vast, cyclopean cities floating in the void, their architecture defying all laws of physics. Creatures with too many limbs and too few eyes worshipped towering idols made of living stone. Stars burned cold and black, their light consuming everything it touched. And at the center of it all was the entity, watching, waiting, hungering. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of what I was seeing. It wasn't just a glimpse into another world. It was a window into madness itself. The others were no better off. Anya screamed, clutching her head as tears streamed down her face. Elena curled into a ball on the floor, rocking back and forth, and muttering prayers in a language I didn't understand. Even Marcus, usually stoic and unshakable, looked like he was on the verge of breaking. Only Raphael remained standing, though barely. He raised his weapon and fired wildly at the entity, bolts of energy ricocheting harmlessly off its shifting form. The thing didn't react, merely tilted its head as if amused by his futile attempts. "Stop!" I yelled, forcing myself to stand, despite the agony coursing through my body. "It's not going to work." But Raphael didn't listen. He kept firing, screaming incoherently until his weapon overheated and died in his hands. Then he dropped to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably. The entity stepped closer, its movements fluid and unnatural. Tentacles lashed out, wrapping around Victor's motionless body and lifting him into the air. His eyes snapped open, empty and lifeless, and he began to speak, not in his own voice, but in a chorus of voices that echoed throughout the chamber. "The stars are right," he intoned, his tone devoid of emotion. "The cycle begins anew." And then, with a sickening crunch, his body dissolved into a fine, ash-like substance that scattered across the floor. The entity absorbed it, growing larger and more defined with each passing moment. It was feeding, growing stronger. "We need to leave, now!" I shouted, my voice raw and hoarse. But escape wasn't so simple. The doors behind us slammed shut with a deafening clang, sealing us inside the chamber. Panic set in as we scrambled to find another way out, but the walls themselves seemed to shift and warp, rearranging the layout of the room to trap us further. The frost crept closer, freezing everything it touched. My fingers went numb and my breath fogged up the inside of my visor. Elena suddenly stopped moving, her gaze fixed on the monolith. Her expression was eerily calm, almost serene. She took a step forward, ignoring my shouted warnings. "Elena, no!" I lunged for her, but she slipped out of my grasp with surprising agility. "They're calling me," she said softly, her voice filled with awe. "They've always been calling me." Before I could stop her, she placed her hand on the surface of the monolith. There was a flash of blinding light, and then she was gone, vanished into thin air. The entity let out another ear-splitting screech, its form swelling to fill half the chamber. The whispers returned, louder than ever, drowning out all other sounds. In that moment, I realized the truth. This wasn't just some abandoned research station. Kappa 7 had been built as a prison, a failsafe to contain whatever unspeakable horror now loomed before us, and we had walked right into its trap. Anya grabbed my arm, snapping me out of my daze. "Roger, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "We have to get out of here." She was right. If we stayed any longer, we'd end up like Victor and Elena, or worse. Summoning what little strength I had left, I led the remaining members of my team toward a maintenance hatch near the ceiling. It was small, barely large enough for us to crawl through, but it was our only chance. As we climbed inside, I glanced back at the chamber one last time. The entity was still there, watching us with those countless eyes. For a brief moment, I thought I saw a smile, an expression of cruel amusement, as if it knew exactly where we were going and what awaited us next. The hatch sealed shut behind us, cutting off the light from the chamber. We were plunged into darkness. The only sound the rhythmic pounding of our hearts and the faint hum of the station's failing systems. But even in the silence, I could still hear them. The whispers. Faint, but persistent, echoing in the deepest recesses of my mind. We weren't safe. Not yet, and maybe we never would be. The maintenance tunnels were narrow and claustrophobic, their walls lined with corroded pipes and exposed wiring that crackled faintly in the dim light. Every step we took echoed unnaturally loud, as if the station itself was amplifying our presence. My breath came in ragged gasps, fogging up the inside of my visor despite the suit's filtration system struggling to keep pace. The cold from the chamber had seeped into my bones, a biting chill that no amount of insulation could dispel. Behind me, Anya and Marcus followed closely, their movements jerky and uncertain. Raphael brought up the rear, his face pale and drawn, his weapon still clutched tightly in trembling hands. None of us spoke. Words felt futile now, like trying to scream against the roar of a hurricane. All we could do was move forward, one agonizing step at a time, and hope that the hatch hadn't sealed us into an even worse fate. The whispers persisted, quieter now but no less insidious. They slithered through the edges of my consciousness, fragments of alien syllables and half-formed thoughts that coalesced into something almost coherent before dissolving again. I tried to focus on the task at hand, finding a way back to the docking bay, but it was becoming harder to distinguish reality from the feverish delusions clawing at my mind. Every so often, I caught glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye. shadows shifting where there should have been none, flickers of motion in the darkness ahead. At first, I told myself it was just fatigue, paranoia playing tricks on me. But then I saw it. A figure standing at the far end of the tunnel, silhouetted by the faint glow of emergency lights. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. And when it turned to look at us, its face was a featureless void. "Did you see that?" Marcus whispered hoarsely, gripping his toolkit like a weapon. I didn't answer. Instead, I raised my own weapon and aimed it down the corridor. The figure didn't move, didn't react. It just stood there, watching us with an intensity that made my skin crawl. Then, without warning, it stepped sideways, into the wall, and disappeared. "What the hell was that?" Raphael demanded, his voice cracking. "We don't have time for this," I snapped, forcing myself to keep moving. "Stay focused." But staying focused was easier said than done. The further we ventured into the labyrinthine tunnels, the more the station seemed to warp around us. Corridors that should have led to familiar areas instead twisted into dead ends, or opened into vast, cavernous spaces filled with machinery that hummed with an otherworldly energy. The air grew thicker, heavier, until each breath felt like dragging steel wool across my lungs. Eventually, we stumbled upon another room, a control center of sorts, judging by the rows of monitors and consoles lining the walls. Most of them were dark, their screens cracked or covered in frost. But one monitor flickered weakly, displaying lines of text scrolling too fast to read. Victor's voice echoed in my mind. "They're trying to communicate." Was this part of it? Some fragment of whatever intelligence had been unleashed, still reaching out, searching for understanding or compliance? Anya approached the console cautiously, her gloved fingers hovering over the keyboard. "Maybe we can use this to contact the horizon. If we can send a distress signal—" "No," Marcus interrupted sharply. "You don't know what you're messing with. For all we know, this thing is what started all of this." He was right, of course. Tampering with anything here was reckless, potentially catastrophic. But desperation has a way of overriding reason. We were trapped, hunted, and running out of options. If there was even a slim chance of getting help, we had to take it. "Do it," I said finally, my voice heavy with resignation. "But be careful." Anya nodded and began typing furiously, her fingers flying across the keys. The screen lit up brighter, the text slowing to a readable pace. Symbols appeared. Not English, not any language I recognized, but they pulsed rhythmically, almost hypnotically. As she worked, the temperature in the room plummeted. Frost spread across the console, freezing her gloves to the surface. She yelped and pulled away, tearing a layer of fabric off in the process. "That's enough," I barked, grabbing her arm and pulling her back. "We're leaving, now." "But," she protested, pointing at the screen. "Look." I turned reluctantly and froze. The symbols had changed, forming a single phrase in stark, blocky letters. "You cannot escape." The monitors exploded simultaneously, shards of glass and sparks raining down on us. Someone screamed. I think it was Raphael. But the sound was drowned out by a deafening roar that shook the entire station. The walls buckled inward, metal groaning under some unimaginable force. Whatever had been chasing us had found us again. We ran. There was no other choice. The tunnels behind us collapsed, sealing off our path and forcing us deeper into the station. Each turn we took led us farther from safety, deeper into the heart of the nightmare. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until they became a chorus of voices screaming directly into my skull. Images flashed unbidden before my eyes. Daniel crying alone in his room after another missed call, my ex-wife signing divorce papers, with tears streaming down her face, the endless void of space stretching infinitely before me, cold and indifferent. And then abruptly, the visions stopped. We emerged into a massive chamber unlike anything we'd seen before. It was spherical, its walls lined with what looked like organic tissue pulsating faintly with a sickly green light. Tubes and cables snaked across the ceiling, dripping viscous fluid onto the floor below. In the center of the room floated a massive orb, translucent and shimmering like liquid mercury. Inside it, shapes writhed and shifted. Humanoid figures fused together in grotesque configurations, their faces frozen in expressions of pure agony. "Oh God," Marcus breathed, his voice barely audible. What is that?" "It's alive," Anya whispered, her tone hollow. "Whatever it is, it's alive." Before I could respond, the orb pulsed violently, sending shockwaves rippling through the chamber. The writhing forms inside it stilled momentarily, and then hundreds of lidless eyes snapped open, staring directly at us. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, vibrating through my chest and rattling my teeth. The entity, the thing that had been hunting us, was here, and it was angry. Raphael broke first. He lunged toward the nearest exit, firing blindly behind him as he went. "I'm not dying here!" he shouted, his voice breaking. "I'm not!" His words cut off abruptly as one of the cables detached from the ceiling and whipped toward him with incredible speed. It wrapped around his torso, lifting him off the ground and slamming him against the wall with bone-crushing force. His screams echoed through the chamber, high-pitched and frantic, until the cable tightened and silenced him forever. Blood sprayed across the floor, pooling beneath his limp body. "Run!" I yelled, though my legs felt like lead. We scattered, ducking and weaving as more cables lashed out, smashing into walls and floors with devastating precision. The orb pulsed again, and the ground beneath us began to shift, rising and falling, like the breathing of some colossal beast. Anya tripped and fell, her helmet cracking against the edge of a console. I grabbed her arm and hauled her to her feet, ignoring her cries of pain. "Keep moving," I shouted, dragging her along with me. Marcus was already ahead of us, pounding on a sealed door at the far end of the chamber. "It won't open," he yelled, panic creeping into his voice. I shoved him aside and activated the manual override, my fingers slipping on the icy controls. The door hissed open just as another cable shot past, narrowly missing my head. We tumbled through the opening and sealed it behind us, collapsing in a heap on the other side. For a moment, there was silence, just the sound of our ragged breathing, and the distant echo of the entity's rage reverberating through the walls. "We're not going to make it, are we?" Anya asked quietly, her voice trembling. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew she was right. The silence that followed was deceptive, a fleeting calm before the storm. We huddled together in the narrow corridor, our breaths fogging up the insides of our helmets as we tried to process what had just happened. Raphael was gone. Not just dead, but erased, consumed like so many others who had crossed paths with whatever abomination now stalked us. His scream still echoed in my mind, a haunting reminder of how fragile we were, against forces beyond comprehension. But there was no time to mourn. The station groaned around us, its very structure shifting and warping as if it were alive. The walls pulsed faintly, veins of organic material spreading across the metal like invasive roots. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe, and the whispers returned, louder now, more insistent, pressing against the edges of my sanity. They weren't just sounds anymore. They were thoughts, emotions, fragments of something ancient and malevolent clawing their way into my consciousness. "Where do we go from here?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me, his eyes wide with fear and desperation, seeking guidance I didn't have. I hesitated, scanning the corridor for any sign of an escape route. The map on my wrist console was useless. The station's layout had changed completely, twisting itself into a labyrinth designed to trap us. All we could do was move forward, deeper into the nightmare, hoping against hope that we might find a way out. "This way," I said finally, pointing toward a set of stairs leading upward. "If we can reach the upper levels, maybe we can get back to the docking bay." No one argued. There was no point. We all knew the odds were stacked against us, but surrender wasn't an option, not yet. The climb felt endless, each step heavier than the last. My muscles burned with exhaustion, and every breath sent sharp pains through my chest. Anya leaned heavily on me, her cracked helmet leaking precious oxygen. She wouldn't last much longer, and neither would the rest of us if we didn't find a way out soon. As we ascended, the station seemed to rebel against our presence. Lights flickered erratically, casting long, distorted shadows that danced unnaturally along the walls. The organic tissue lining the corridors pulsed faster, glowing, brighter with each passing moment. It was as if the station itself was alive and angry. Then we reached the top. What awaited us was worse than anything we had encountered so far. The upper level opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. Suspended in the center of the room was another orb, larger and more grotesque than the one below. Its surface churned like liquid fire, revealing glimpses of countless forms trapped within. Humanoid figures fused together in horrific configurations, their faces frozen in eternal agony. Tentacles writhed outward from the orb, lashing at the air with unnatural speed and precision. And then, slowly, the entity emerged. It stepped, or rather, flowed, out of the orb, its form shifting constantly between states of existence. Limbs stretched impossibly long, splitting into tendrils tipped with razor-sharp spines. Its body was a mass of writhing flesh, pulsating, with sickly green light. And its face, if you could call it that, was a kaleidoscope of eyes, mouths, and jagged teeth, arranged in patterns that defied logic. "You shouldn't have come here," it said, its voice a cacophony of tones overlapping and resonating. "You cannot comprehend what lies beyond your fragile reality." "Stay back," I shouted, raising my weapon despite knowing it was futile. The others did the same, their hands trembling as they aimed at the monstrosity before us. The entity laughed, a sound that shook the very foundations of the station. "Your weapons are meaningless. Your resistance is insignificant. You are nothing compared to what I am." It lunged at us, moving faster than should have been possible. One of its tendrils struck Marcus first, impaling him through the chest and lifting him into the air. He screamed, blood bubbling from his lips as he struggled feebly against the creature's grip. Then, with a casual flick of its appendage, it hurled him across the chamber, smashing him against the wall with enough force to shatter his helmet. Anya screamed and fired wildly, her shots ricocheting harmlessly off the entity's shifting form. Another tendril wrapped around her leg, dragging her toward the orb. She clawed at the floor, leaving deep gouges in the metal as she tried to resist, but it was no use. The orb absorbed her, pulling her inside with a wet, slurping sound. Her screams cut off abruptly, replaced by the guttural chanting of the voices that had haunted us since the beginning. Only Raphael and I remained. "We're not going to survive this," Raphael muttered, his voice hollow. Tears streamed down his face as he stared at the entity, paralyzed by terror. "Yes, we are," I lied, gripping my weapon tighter. "We just need to—" Before I could finish, the entity surged forward, its tendrils slicing through the air like blades. I ducked, narrowly avoiding being decapitated, and rolled to the side. Raphael wasn't so lucky. A tendril pierced his shoulder, pinning him to the ground. He cried out in pain, dropping his weapon as blood pooled beneath him. "Roger, help me," he gasped, reaching out toward me. I wanted to save him, I truly did, but I couldn't. Not without risking both our lives. Instead, I turned away, forcing myself to keep moving. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to stop, to turn back and fight, but I knew it was over. This wasn't about anymore. It was about making sure Danny never... Now I ran, ignoring the searing pain. My legs and the crushing weight of guilt pressing down on my chest. The entity pursued me, its laughter echoing through the chamber as it toyed with me, prolonging the inevitable. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Finally, I reached the docking bay. The horizontal loomed ahead, its sleek hull gleaming under the dim emergency lights. Summoning the last of my strength, I sprinted toward it, punching in the access code with shaking fingers. The hatch opened, and I stumbled inside, sealing it shut behind me. For a moment, I allowed myself to believe I might actually make it, that I might escape this nightmare and return to the life I had left behind. But then the ship shuddered violently, throwing me to the floor. Alarms blared, red lights flashing as systems failed one by one. Through the viewport, I saw the station collapsing in on itself, consumed by the entity as it fed on the remnants of Kappa 7. And then, in the reflection of the glass, I saw it. The whispers became deafening, overwhelming, drowning out everything else. My vision blurred, and I realized with dawning horror that I wasn't alone. Shadows moved inside the cockpit, coalescing into a familiar shape. Tentacles erupted from the walls, wrapping around me and pulling me toward the viewport. I screamed, thrashing futilely as the entity's face pressed against the glass. its countless eyes staring directly into mine. "You cannot escape," it whispered, its voice reverberating through my skull. "You are already mine." And then, darkness. When I awoke, I was floating in the void, weightless and cold. The stars burned black, their light consuming everything they touched. Around me, shapes moved, vast, cyclopean cities floating in the abyss, worshippers bowing before idols made of living stone. And at the center of it all was the entity, watching, waiting. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Because I wasn't Roger Sullivan anymore. I was something else, something wrong.